happy days are here again. And they are here again, for out of a maze of confusion and anxiety has come a beacon light to guide the way to better times.
And I had the two teams set up behind the Bevo plant. And when they had the right signal, and Daddy was down to look at a car and was raising heck with me because he said it's premature to go buy one after we just got legalized. And we're going through a hard time until we get started. So we turned around, and I had the two teams come down, and it was the most gratifying thing I think I've ever done in my life.
Gotta have heart. All you really need is heart. When the odds are saying you'll never win, that's when the grin should start. Mister, you can be a hero. You can open any door. There's nothing to it but to do it. You gotta have heart. Miles and miles and miles of heart.
We've just taken the most ambitious step in our history. But that doesn't break tradition. Indeed, we're just keeping faith with the principles laid down by my predecessors and with the loyalty of our many good friends. Progress can't stand still in a business any more than in a nation. In planning boldly for the future, we're merely in step with the spirit of enterprise, the spirit that made our country great. Oh, there'll be challenging problems from time to time, of course. But if we meet those problems with the faith and vision that build our democracy, we'll come through stronger than ever. That's the American way.
The important news from Anheuser-Busch Incorporated.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm August A. Busch, Jr., President of Anheuser-Busch Incorporated. We have an important announcement to make, and I'd like to make it personally. We are now introducing a new kind of beer, a beer that lives up to the Anheuser-Busch quality tradition. It's Busch Bavarian.
Busch Bavarian beer.
One of the highlights of our sales convention was the fact that your Western region finished 1957 in the #1 spot. This accomplishment is a tribute to you wholesalers. We are all justly proud of this achievement, and I heartily congratulate you. With this kind of cooperation, no one, I repeat, no one, can possibly get ahead of us. In closing, I want to express my personal wish to each of you that the year 59 will be good to you and your families in every way. I am confident that together we can make this year the greatest in all of our history. Thanks and good luck to all of you. Gentlemen, we live in a period when mechanization seems to be king. But we certainly don't need to act and live like machines ourselves. If we do, I can almost guarantee you that there won't be many more successful years like the ones just passed.
We've got hope. We don't sit around and mope. Not a solitary sob do we heave. Mister, 'cause we've got hope. Boys, I'm proud of you.
I am very proud and delighted to announce that at 10:34 a.m. on December the 15th, Anheuser-Busch rolled out our 10 millionth barrel of beer brewed this year. 10 million barrels in 1 year is a record never approached before by any single brewer in the world. I would like to thank the millions of people everywhere whose enjoyment of our fine beers made this possible. To all of us at Anheuser-Busch, this achievement is a tremendous source of satisfaction and pride. When that 10 millionth barrel rolled out, we stopped and drank a toast to all of our friends everywhere. My thanks again, and may I wish the warmest of holiday greetings to your home from the house of Anheuser-Busch. I want to say thanks to all of you for the confidence you have brought to the entire Anheuser-Busch organization throughout these many years. God bless you and your families from the bottom of my heart.
We've got heart.
Now, congratulations are in order for you, Colonel Busch, for the fine thing that you have done in buying the St. Louis Cardinals.
Well, thank you very much. We're delighted to be the owners of the Cardinals, and we're going to try to give the fans everywhere the finest baseball that is known in the United States.
Hey, take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I never get back. Let me root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame. 'Cause it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
Practically anything and everything that has something to do with the Cardinals is a thrill for me.
I don't like to lose now any more than I did 50 years ago.
Now is the time to tell the entire Budweiser family about 3 commitments we have made. 3 commitments to the future, because these commitments make the future. Quality brewing, that's the first commitment, and that's the only way we will ever brew Budweiser now or in the future. And you can tell the world I said so. We pledge to you that we shall continue to brew the finest beers in the world. We are in the beer business for the long term. No shortcuts for us. Our marketing team is the best in the beer business.
August A. Busch, Jr., chairman of the board and chief executive officer of Anheuser-Busch Incorporated, bungs the barrel, and another brewing industry milestone is passed. Mr. Busch, consumers and companies are faced by rising costs these days. Are you tempted to compromise the quality of your product in any way?
As a matter of fact, we're going to stick to quality no matter what it costs. I'm going to stick to it through thick and thin.
If I had only one word to describe my father, the word would be leader.
From the world below, where the clear wind
Channel 5, KSDK, St. Louis. And now, Channel 5 Eyewitness News Update.
And meanwhile, August Busch Jr., widely known as Gussie, is back home tonight after his hospital stay. Busch is 90 years old. He was hospitalized late last month for what a spokesman called routine tests. Busch is president and chairman of the St. Louis Cardinals. He returned to his home, Grant's Farm, yesterday and is said to be resting comfortably.
And that is good news.
Is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
And whose name meant beer and baseball. August Busch Jr. has died at his home in St. Louis. Mr. Busch took over his family's Anheuser-Busch brewery in 1946 and built it into the largest brewery in the world. He was also the president of the St. Louis Cardinals. And Mr. Busch was 90.
This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. August Anheuser-Busch Jr., patriarch of a beer family and a sportsman, died today in St. Louis. Known as Gussie Busch, he was president of the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team and until 1975, head of the Anheuser-Busch brewery. Gussie Busch was 90 years old.
NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
August Busch Jr., a man who devoted his life to two great American pastimes, is dead at the age of 90. Busch was a man of beer and baseball. He built Anheuser-Busch Budweiser into America's largest brewery, and he owned the St. Louis Cardinals. He once said, however, that it was easier to finish first in beer than in baseball.
The flags fly at half-staff tonight over the world's largest brewery and also Busch Stadium. The man who made Budweiser the king of beers is dead. The last of the old-time beer barons, an old-fashioned civic leader who loved his city and loved his St. Louis Cardinals.
This is a News 4 special. August Busch Jr., the king of beer. Here are Julius Hunter and Larry Connors.
Good evening again. August Anheuser-Busch Jr., one of a kind. Everyone from the President of the United States to the guy who sweeps the brewery floor called him Gussie.
He died today at his home at the age of 90 in the house that's called the Castle, a place with a quaint name, Grant's Farm.
And that was Gussie Busch, a fabulously wealthy man who brewed beer for every man and certainly enjoyed hoisting a few with them.
He certainly did. Tonight, a look back at the king of beer and baseball, and a whole lot more.
August Anheuser-Busch Jr. was born March 28, 1899, the third generation of a St. Louis brewing dynasty. He went to work in the brewery in 1922, sweeping floors and cleaning vats, as the story goes. Father August Sr. kept the brewery alive during Prohibition, producing yeast, maple syrup, soft drinks, and other products. The brewery survived Prohibition to celebrate repeal in 1933. August and his father sent the first case of post-Prohibition Budweiser to President Roosevelt. And the legendary Clydesdales were a gift from Gussie to his father to mark the end of the nation's dry spell. August Jr. became head of the brewery in 1947 and set out immediately to take Anheuser-Busch from fourth to first place and keep it there. His strategy, simple. Nationwide expansion. Looking back over 90 remarkable years, those who knew him say he would probably want to be remembered as a fair man, a man with drive.
And like his beer, Gussie Busch's life had gusto.
A little earlier tonight, we talked with one of his friends and colleagues, Anheuser-Busch Vice President Michael Rorty. He certainly has a story or two to tell about the boss.
Indeed I do, Julius. He was loved by all the people at Anheuser-Busch, and I think he nestles in the hearts of everybody from St. Louis. But there were many times, you know, he had a look that would freeze you in your tracks. When Gussie had a problem and you were the cause of it or a part of it or something, at least he thought so, he had a way of looking at you where your blood actually froze in your veins.
And I understand you didn't say no to him.
You couldn't say no to him because he had a wonderful, charming way of saying, do this for me, pal, will you?
Yeah.
Just do it for me.
Well, Mike, this feeling, though, is this more like a paternal instinct? I mean, you wanted to do it for him as father or, you know, more than just another worker-employee relationship.
Very much so, Larry. He was the kind of a guy who engendered an incredible loyalty and a respect, but a love for him. You just wanted to perform for Gussie. He was that kind of a guy. We called him the boss, and we still call him the boss right up till this day. because he was the boss in every sense of the word, but he was your pal.
I understand he could get rather wild at some of his parties and all. Jack Buck was telling me today that when he said everybody into the pool, he meant everybody into the pool, or you might get sprayed with a garden hose.
You'd get some help getting into the pool, or he'd get you with the hose, that's right. He had a wonderful little dog named Scruffy. He said to me, we were visiting with him in Florida, and he said, now Scruffy will run off, jump on that floating raft out there, and make it go to the other end of the pool, jump out, and come right back to me. He said, now Scruffy, you go ahead. Scruffy ran out, missed the raft, landed in the pool. The old boy stood there watching Scruffy, and he turns around and he says to me, you know, he never did that before. I said, I think he's going to drown. He won't drown. Not Gussie's dog. He didn't drown. He came right back up.
He had a zest for life that just seemed to infect everyone he came around, didn't he?
He really did. He filled you with an energy and a devotion and a dedication that was really unreal. He made our company, really, he set the pattern for our company and what it's become.
I understand, though, when you played cards with Gussie, you better watch not only your hand, but how he was handling his cards.
I heard about Whitey's comment earlier today, but, you know, he never cheated at Jen. He just rearranged the rules.
It's his deck, his game, right?
His game. And so he would remind you of a certain rule that you didn't know existed, like the August Jr. rule.
I know you had told us that your mother never really could fully accept you working for a brewery, but then she had a chance to meet Gussie Busch. Did that kind of give her a new perspective on not just your job, but the man himself?
That's right. When my mother was, she's 92, I just visited her today, but she took the pledge over in Ireland when she was a little girl, and she never broke it. So she wasn't too keen on me going with the brewery these many years ago. And then a few years ago, we were dining at the Bevo Mill, and Gussie and Margaret happened to be there, and the boss was that kind of a genteel, wonderful, charming guy. He came over, kissed her, embraced her, welcomed her to St. Louis, and from that day on, she said, well, if they have to drink, I hope it'll be Budweiser.
So we will remember August Busch Jr. for not only the business opportunities that he brought to St. Louis, and also his love of sports and all, but also for that great sense of humor that he brought with him.
He had a great sense of humor. He had a way of looking at life and its problems and putting them into the proper perspective. He said one time about building the new stadium, at my age, I don't need it, but the fans deserve it, and by God, it's going to be built. Gussie made it happen.
He made a lot of things happen, and it's hard to say which was first in his life. Beer, baseball, his family, or the fans in St. Louis, the people who loved him, his workers at the brewery.
He did consider the brewery his second love. I know he said his family first, then the brewery, and of course then the city of the St. Louis area. Money reporter Mike Brown has a look back at how the King of Beer actually seized his crown.
It was sometime in 1946 that August A. Busch Jr. uttered the 5 words that would become the motto for his long career as president of Anheuser-Busch. It was the year he took his rightful seat on the throne, succeeding his brother Adolphus III. It was a time that Anheuser-Busch was languishing in 4th place among American brewers. It was then that Gussie Busch told his family and his employees that being second isn't worth anything. From that point forward, August Busch Jr. set out to make his company the #1 brewery in the nation, proving out one old business maxim after another, like the one that says quality sells, or the notion that in order to make money, you must be prepared to spend money.
The tougher the competition, the greater the effort.
Busch first embarked on an ambitious expansion program, spending $50 million to expand and modernize the company's brewing complex in South St. Louis. He pioneered the concept of brewing beer close to where it is sold, building 8 branch breweries across the country. His employees recall with fondness and sometimes trepidation that the old man would show up for every plant opening, sidestepping the lavish blue ribbon festivities for a quick trip to the men's room. If you can't take care of the bathroom, he would say, you can't expect to run a brewery. Making beer was a science passed on to him by his forebears. Selling it is what set August Busch Jr. apart from them. He created an innovative distribution system, making millionaires out of the independent businessmen that he handpicked to sell his product across the country. In 1955, Busch spent a year crisscrossing the nation in his private railroad car, meeting with each of the company's 900 wholesalers. Just 2 years later, Anheuser-Busch would become the leading beer maker in the U.S., a title it has not relinquished to this day. August Busch Jr. also realized the various indirect methods of marketing and promoting his products. In 1933, he hitched a colorful beer wagon to 8 proud and massive horses, a breed known as Clydesdales. The images of the Clydesdale 8-horse hitch and Anheuser-Busch are now inseparable. 20 years later, in 1953, Busch bought the St. Louis Cardinals, watched them become champions, and through clever promotion, quietly impressed among his customers and fans that his beer and his team were both winners. Busch also engineered the company's expansion into the entertainment business, opening the Busch Gardens family theme parks in Virginia and Florida. The fact that the parks were safe, clean, and above all fun won Anheuser-Busch tens of millions of new friends and countless new customers. The man who began his career cleaning vats and sweeping floors at the brewery on Pestalozzi stepped down from the company as chairman half a century later in 1975. But his imprint upon Anheuser-Busch, indeed upon American industry itself, can never be erased. Gussie has left his mark.
I don't know if folks have really stopped to think either about the mark he had carried for St. Louis around the world. Everywhere the Busch product was sold, it says Anheuser-Busch, St. Louis, Missouri. And sometimes we tend to forget that. But certainly, Mr. Busch was a beer baron, a captain of industry.
But talk to most folks, and they knew Gussie Busch for just the kind of guy that he was, just plain and simple, despite all of his wealth. Joining us tonight are News 4 Sports Director Zip Mazeppa and Bob Bragg, longtime sports columnist for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Gentlemen?
Well, first, let's talk to Bob. When you were way back, of course, we heard Jack Buck earlier tonight talk about the early years in the 50s when Gussie would put on the uniform and kibitz with Musial and Red, his favorites.
I go back to the cold, gray February morning where they sneaked the interview through the purchase of the ball club by the brewery. And Busch himself personally was not nearly what we today know. This did a lot for him, as well as it did for the Cardinals and for the brewery. And from that day forward, it was like became a toy. Although Larry was correct. I think the batting order properly was his family, the brewery, animals, the fans, and then the ball club. But the ball club, of course, fomented so much for him. But one of the great things I liked about him was his ability to, you know, people right after the war were calling him Colonel this, Colonel that. He'd been in the service, and I always learned to be polite, so I started calling him, you know, Colonel instead of Mr. I thought, well, I'm moving in. He said, cut out that Mr. Call me Gus. So to me, everybody else he was Gussie, but to me he was Gus. And he lived that way. They drove into the Cardinal train, stopped up at Birmingham, and Alex Grammas, a young Greek shortstop, was there, took us to his uncle's restaurant. Busch sat around a booth like we are now, fell at a counter there, give that fella a Budweiser. He was a copy reader for the Birmingham News. Now, you know darn well when he walked upstairs, that whole town knew it. But it was so great with him. He was at home with caviar or a cheese sandwich.
Yeah, I understand he made a point of getting to know, in the old days, all of the beer distributors all around the country for Anheuser-Busch, and would play cards with them and have a good time with them, tipping a few.
Yeah, and that's right, and he had a game, you know, he was in great shape. I like to put him in proper perspective. To me, he's still 55 years old, round-faced and strong as a bull. From driving and riding, he played a game where he put your knees in his, and you tried to pull him out. Well, you couldn't. Then he put his knees in yours, and he ripped them out. Well, I was about 20 years younger than him. He offended the heck out of me, and he started me to work out. But that was one of the little things with him, because you say stop anywhere and have these people come aboard. He loved traveling by train. And regardless of what they say, I think he did chisel a little on those gin games because he wanted to win so badly. You know,
Bob,
competition was his life.
What about his relationship with the players? I mean, he didn't just care about how they did on the field. He was concerned about their families.
It unfortunately retrogressed after Crowley. If you think about it now, as a joke. The Cardinals became the first ball club with $1 million payroll in '68. He was very happy about that. Then a few things happened that soured him, and he turned the other way. You know, he paid, but he paid begrudgingly, and there wasn't the same paternalism that there had been in the early years, and that was too bad, because he loved to have the players come out and have picnics and everything else, and from then on, he had affection, but not the same affection he had earlier.
One of the guys he had an in-and-out relationship was Harry Carey, the announcer for the Cardinals at one time. What do you remember about Harry?
Well, I think they got along great till Harry got involved with the family. But he was Terry was pretty respectful to him. I was not. I tried to treat him just as an average guy because he treated me that way, and he seemed to like it. One thing I think I did from now on in was to calm him down. He shot from the hip, and you were reporters. You know, a man has contributed as much to the city as he has. I'd say, Gus, do you mean that now? I give him a second chance.
All right.
Well, I don't know, pal. I don't know.
You know,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Bob.
No.
You know, as the story goes, I'm sure you remember when Whitey Herzog came in 1980, he held a private meeting with Whitey, and he said, you know, I'm getting old. You know, I'm not going to be around that much longer. I just want to win one more championship. So in 82, you know, they go on a huge fight down the stretch, and Whitey and the boys pull through, tough race, beat Milwaukee in 7 games. They're up there on the podium. The television cameras around, the champagne's flowing. The commissioner gives them the trophy, and Whitey says, here you go, Gussie. And Gussie says, this is great. Can we do it one more time next year?
You know, Gussie used to have him come out there. Whitey liked to slip out there alone because he didn't want the entourage around. And the old man have a boat shot. I think a boat shot was bouillon with a little gin in it. And he'd have Whitey having a few with him. And finally Whitey said, hey, Chief, he said, I got to go over and speak another line tonight. He said, have one more for the ditch.
All right, we were talking about Harry Carey, and we have some thoughts from Harry Carey on the death of August Busch.
Oh, it's such a wonderful man. You know, it's going to be such an irreparable loss to the city of St. Louis because anytime the city needed anything, Gussie Busch was there to give it to him. And he was a fun-loving guy, the most democratic man I ever saw. Here I was, a poor little announcer. I was able to rub elbows with him a lot. He loved my company. I loved his company. We played cards. We drank together. I knew it was inevitable, as it is for all of us, but I had known that he was in ill health, and I was just hoping and praying that maybe he could last forever, because if any guy should have been immortal, it should have been Gussie Busch.
We've had a lot of folks contribute their thoughts. We want to thank Bob Bragg for coming in, a lot of others. You know, he's going to be remembered in so many different ways. You have a story that stands out in your mind.
I remember sitting next to Mr. Busch at a luncheon at his house one time, and we were talking about his life, and he said, you like beer? Well, what are you going to say? And Paul was the king of beers. So he yelled to one of his servants, Cletus. He said, Cletus, get us a couple of Michelobes. So the gentleman disappeared for a while, came back with the Michelob, and Mr. Busch poured it into his Pilsner glass, and he took a swig of it, and he said, this beer is too blankety-blank cold. He said, I told him that beer should be a certain temperature, so he sat there holding this Pilsner glass in his hand, trying to raise the temperature of that beer. For about 10 minutes he held it, squeezing that glass. He took a swig. He then handed me his glass. He says, you take a drink. He says, now isn't that better? And I said, yes, sir.
Yes, sir, it was. I couldn't have got it to that temperature myself.
Not at all. Not at all.
Well, we all carry a lot of different memories, even those who really never came directly in contact with Gussie Busch. You're part of the family. You have thoughts, and certainly you see what he's done for this community and everything else. He did love the ball club. He loved the St. Louis area, and he loved what he brought the city, and I think we can all understand and appreciate that.
Jim Boland covered Cardinal baseball for a lot of years, and Jim has some final looks tonight at Gussie Busch.
Well, friends, I'm just thrilled to death. Today is a real, honest-to-goodness, great sportsman's day for me. I never was happier in all my life to have the honor of being the president of the Cardinals.
That announcement by August Busch in 1953 ushered in a new era of Cardinal baseball. Old Sportsman's Park was renovated. The brewery spent $2.5 million on everything from restrooms to a new scoreboard. And that historic edifice at Grand and Dodier became Busch Stadium. And with the new name, a new goal by the club's president.
Mr. Busch, a beautiful camp, beautiful weather, everything. Now all we need is a pennant, huh?
You bet your sweet life, Harry, and we're going to try like the devil to get it this year.
Busch signed the Cardinals' first black player in 1953, Tom Alston, a first baseman with a good glove and weak bat. There were managers coming and going, Eddie Stanky, Fred Hutchinson, Solly Hemus, Stan Hack, and the like. But it was Gussie Busch who brought Bing Devine, a former Cardinal knot-holder, back home as general manager in 1955. The Redbirds' outlook began to brighten.
Well, he was demanding and rough and tough.
but he was also compassionate when the time came to be that way.
In 1964, after 11 years of patient waiting, Gussie was ready for a winner.
I don't like to lose now any more than I did 50 years ago.
No more waiting. 1964, the Birds do it.
Cardinals won the pennant!
And the World Series, too. Since '64, the Cards have played in 5 more World Series. While leading the Anheuser-Busch Brewery to world dominance in beer sales, Busch found time to be a leader in the civic improvement of St. Louis.
It was Papa and Dave Calhoun and a few other great leaders who started the revitalization of downtown St. Louis.
Gussie led the way to building a new stadium that appropriately bears his name.
Are you happy looking back that you bought this ball club many years ago?
You bet your sweet life. Still love it.
What's been your biggest thrill with us?
Winning the World Series.
And you're going to look forward to one this year, I guess.
You're damn right we are.
Okay. And if August Busch Jr. had a love affair with the city, St. Louisans were eager to return their love in kind. On his 85th birthday, the stadium was filled with cheering celebrants. Today, St. Louisans mourn his passing. Gone is the familiar figure riding atop the wagon pulled by his beloved Clydesdales, waving his red Stetson to an admiring crowd. Gone is the gravelly voice, surely a trademark as familiar as the A and Eagle. The man is gone, but the mark August Busch Jr. leaves on St. Louis will endure as long as there is civic pride, baseball and beer, and brotherhood among men.
Thank you, and God bless every one of you and your families.
We interrupt our regularly scheduled program in order to bring you an Eyewitness News special report.
He loved life. He cut a path through life, and I think he got every sweet bit of juice from the fruit of life that was possible.
One strike away. Got him!
This was August A. Busch Jr. in one of his finer moments as owner of the St. Louis Cardinals. Some say there wouldn't be Cardinal baseball without him. But that's only one part of the legacy of the man who died today at the age of 90.
And besides baseball, there might not be a lot of other things in St. Louis, too, like civic progress and jobs for thousands of people. During the next half hour, we'll take a look at the legacy of August A. Busch Jr., which began here in St. Louis 90 years ago. Gussie Busch was born into great wealth on March 28, 1899. His grandfather, Adolphus A. Busch, and his father-in-law, Eberhard Anheuser, started the brewery bearing their names in 1876. That brewery was enormously successful, and August Anheuser-Busch Jr. worked hard but led a privileged life until Prohibition threatened the family wealth. During those years, 1919 and 1933, Gussie and his family fought to save the company, and they did. Gussie became president of the brewery in 1946. And he built the company into the dominant force it is today in the brewing industry. Tonight we'll be talking with close friends and associates of Mr. Busch, people like former Globe Democrat publisher Duncan Bauman, former Senator Thomas Eagleton, and Anheuser-Busch Executive Vice President, Marketing Director Mike Rorty, Vice President and Marketing Director Mike Rorty. They'll be live with us here in the studio. Many of the people remembering Gussie Busch tonight are former employees. Some of them high-level types for sure, but employees nevertheless. But tonight, Channel 5's Mike Owens talked to a man who put Gussie Busch to work.
Dick, Busch went to work building St. Louis University back in 1950. The college needed financial help. Busch was willing to help, but was afraid to go out and do speeches to raise funds.
We gave him some speech instructions, and in the early days, we, at his request, wrote his speeches, and this was the beginning of a whole new world for him.
Busch threw himself into his work for the university. His contributions led to the construction of the Busch Center on campus. But Reinert says Busch really saved the entire university.
I really dread to think what we might be today if we hadn't gotten him totally committed and excited about our future.
This lamp is a bit of Busch memorabilia. Over time, Reinert and Busch became close personal friends. And once, Reinert was called in on a special mission to bless Gussie's Tampa, Florida theme park.
We're all ready to dedicate the gardens, and I'm going to have all of my suppliers and distributors and the board and everybody down here for a big dedication. And I want to start that dedication with a prayer. And he said, I told the local people to get somebody, and they said, Mr. Busch, no minister in Florida will say a prayer over a brewery, so you've got to come down here and say the prayer, which I did.
Reinert converted Busch to Catholicism in the mid-1960s and was with him today when he died. He also administered last rites. Reinert says he was at peace and ready to go home. Dick?
Thank you, Mike. Gussie Busch's professional career spanned more than 67 years. Community leaders in St. Louis give him much of the credit for dragging the city out of the doldrums and helping to turn it into a vital, attractive place to live.
Gussie Busch leaves behind a rich legacy in St. Louis. Philanthropist, civic leader, businessman. Gussie Busch gave his all to the city he loved.
He was an institution in St. Louis. It's hard to count all the good things that he has done for this community. He will be missed, but his accomplishments are part of the life of the city and will last for a long, long time.
Among Busch's many contributions, helping to build the stadium which bears his name. City leaders credit the stadium with giving downtown development a big push forward. In the years since the construction of Busch Stadium, the entire downtown area has become revitalized. Many believe the building boom was sparked by this one man's faith in the city of St. Louis. Busch left his mark in other ways. The baseball Cardinals, which he bought in 1953, draw fans from all over the region, pumping spirit and money into the city. He turned the family estate, Grant's Farm, into a major tourist attraction. And of course, there is the family brewery, the largest in the world. But there was more to Busch than baseball and beer. He supported everything from the Boys Club to Washington University. Perhaps Mayor Shamel put it best, the death of Gussie Busch leaves a big void in St. Louis. For Channel 5 Eyewitness News, I'm Karen Foss.
Well, Gussie Busch left behind not only stadiums and buildings and monuments, but a lot of friends here in St. Louis, and two of them are with us this evening. Two St. Louisans who knew Gussie Busch very well. G. Duncan Bauman, the former publisher of the Globe-Democrat, and former U.S. Senator Tom Eagleton. Karen Foss, I think, gave a pretty good summary there of all the great achievements that Mr. Busch is credited with, the awards that he got, and the honors that the community gave him. But, Dunk, I'd like to ask you a question. In 1961, the Globe-Democrat did name him the Man of the Year. There might be some people who think, well, he got all these awards because of the huge public relations machine that the brewery could churn out. What kind of a guy was he really like in those days, and did he deserve all those awards and accolades?
Yeah, yes, he did deserve them. But Gussie, the reason that Gussie was so highly admired was that he did what others did not do. If he was involved in a campaign for the community of some kind, Gussie would do it himself. He'd make the calls that had to be made to get it done. If there were a political candidate in whom he was interested, he didn't ask a subordinate to go cultivate that political candidate. Gussie cultivated that political candidate. Gussie would call that political candidate to his office and say, I'd like to have you run for office, and this is what I'll do for you. If you'll run, I'll help you in your campaign. Gussie was a doer. I recall on one occasion when there was an effort being made to build the convention center, and there was a need to raise some money to help finish the convention center. And Gussie collared a number of people in my presence and said, now look, you guys are lying down on this. You're not doing anything. Here's what I'll do, and this is what I want you to do. Now let's get this done this week.
Straight talk all the way.
And he did his part, and he got it done that week.
Dunk, you mentioned politics. Tom, you're a former U.S. Senator, of course, but you knew Mr. Busch before you ever got into politics.
Yes, I went to work in the Anheuser-Busch legal department after I got out of law school around 1953, 1954, and then for a while I traveled with Mr. Busch and was his speechwriter. He didn't like to read speeches. He was a great speaker, great salesman, the greatest I've ever seen, but he did not like a prepared text. And Al Fleischman or I or somebody would write the speech, and he'd get into about ladies and gentlemen, and that would be the end of the prepared text. He always spoke from the heart. He was marvelous.
What about his family? Did he had a very large family, of course, 10 children, I think 27 grandchildren, 9 great-grandchildren. Do you know much about how he dealt with his family?
Well,
That's the distinction that I'd like to get across about Gussie Busch. He was known to most of the community as a dominant personality who led the community, a strong personality who got things his way, wanted things his way. But in fact, he had a deep love and affection for his children. The 7 children by his marriage to Trudy, he was very close to them. It was not at all uncommon for him to teach the youngsters himself, riding and other activities. He would spend a lot of time with them.
Was he the kind of person you think that didn't want the public to know that he had this soft spot, that he had this sentimental side? Tom, you wrote for him and you knew him.
Well, he did have the, he could be tough. He had that tough side, and then 2 seconds later, after he maybe bawled someone out for making a horrendous mistake, he'd be the most forgiving guy in the world. Said, "Oh, okay, fine, everybody makes a mistake, let's move on." He could be both tough and he could be very gentle almost at the same time. And I presume that maybe he sort of kept that gentle side a little bit to himself.
I'd like to get into it with you gentlemen about some of the card games you might have played with him, but we have to move on to other things.
He played a pretty good game of gin, and you didn't get in a gin game with him unless you were prepared to lose a lot of money.
And to do a lot of yelling and screaming.
Tom Eagleton, Doug Bauman, thank you both very much for joining us. Some sentimental ideas and thoughts about Mr. Busch. There's nothing complicated, though, about August A. Busch Jr.'s feelings about success. He once said that being second isn't worth anything. And this might be what propelled the brewery to the top. We'll take a look at the business side of his legacy when we come back. Well, Gussie Busch was truly a leader in the brewing industry. He would be working on future trends before other people in the business even recognized them. And he did build his company into the king of beers. But it wasn't easy or without risk.
Progress can't stand still in a business any more than in a nation.
Anheuser-Busch did take risks to build its first brewery outside of St. Louis in New Jersey. There followed new breweries in Florida, Texas, California, and elsewhere. And Gussie was personally involved in all the planning. And he wasn't afraid to introduce new products or advertise them.
We are now introducing a new kind of beer, a beer that lives up to the Anheuser-Busch quality tradition. It's Busch Bavarian.
Busch Bavarian beer.
Gussie knew how to sell beer, and undoubtedly his greatest marketing achievement was development of the Clydesdales. This was their 50th anniversary.
I think they've done a marvelous job for Budweiser, and they're a great hit.
Gussie knew how to sell beer, and so does Mike Rorty, who is Executive Vice President and Marketing Director for Anheuser-Busch. Mike, you joined the brewery about the time that New Jersey brewery was being opened. Was it a risk at that time?
That's right, Dick. It was a great risk. It was unusual for us to go to the East Coast and make a decision to brew Budweiser in a foreign country than St. Louis. There was a lot of speculation about it, but he had the farsightedness to know that it was the right thing to do.
And nothing stopped him after that brewery got off the ground, and I guess that paved the way and really changed the whole complexion of the brewing industry in this country.
Indeed it did, because it made our national brewing policy a real winner. We were the leaders back in 1953 when I came with the brewery. Gussie was our champion, the boss, we affectionately called him. We wouldn't call him Gussie. And he, in 1954, saw our leadership slip. And when I first met him was back then, he was on a railroad train and he was going around the country meeting with all of our wholesalers, soliciting their help to regain our leadership. And the following year, they gave it back to him, and we've never relinquished it since.
So that's more than 35 years ago. Would a brewery president now go and personally meet with all the distributors around the country? Or?
The one we have would, yes.
That's in the heritage of the Busch family, I guess.
Yes.
He was a tough competitor, and I have to ask you, I mean, Anheuser-Busch has run into some lawsuits about its pricing practices, about monopolies, allegations, and so forth. What kind of businessman was he, and what's the weight that you would put on some of those practices or the allegations of those practices?
He was a straightforward, straight-up, straight shooter, as he used to say. The cards were always on the table with him. There was never anything ever devious. And if there was any problem with a practice or some kind of a situation, he would call those in and he would look them right square in the eye and ask them directly, give me the facts.
Would that be the same in labor negotiations, about the same?
Yes, and I think he really had the esteem and respect of all of his labor friends.
Mike, you worked for him, and I'm sure you're known for many anecdotes that you've told over the years. Any special anecdote about Gussie Busch?
He was a lovable man. You respected him, and he could freeze the blood in your veins if he gave you that look and said, "Pal, you better tell me exactly what's going on here." But there was a fierce determination, a dedication, a loyalty in him, and he would, as he used to say to me, warm the cockles of my heart. He would go out and make things happen. There was never a dull moment around him.
Mike, thank you for joining us. You've been with the brewery 35 years or more yourself now, so you have a long time with him, and I'm sure you can tell from the look in your eye what a warm feeling you've got for Mr. Busch.
That's very sincere, and most of us at the brewery feel that way, Dick.
Well, Anheuser-Busch, of course, the executives there all say that, and Anheuser-Busch, just the regular rank-and-file workers today, also saddened by the word of Gussie's death. Channel 5's Deanne Lane is in the newsroom now, and she has that reaction.
Dick, the news of the death of August Busch Jr. spread quickly around the brewery. The flags around the plant are at half-staff in honor of the man who had built up AB to the world's largest brewery. Employees we talked to all remember Gussie as a man who helped them.
I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him.
He really helped build this organization to what it is today, and we're all grateful to him for it.
My special memory to Mr. Busch is giving me a job down here.
Although Busch had given up leadership of the brewery to his son, August Busch III, back in 1975, he was honorary chairman. Dick?
He was the king of beers and the king of baseball in St. Louis, and we'll show you how August A. Busch Jr. walked the fine line between a businessman and a sportsman next. Gussie Busch, of course, had a passion for baseball, and his St. Louis Cardinals took on the National League East champions, the Chicago Cubs, tonight at Busch Stadium. And right before the game, it was time to remember the man who owned the Cardinals for the last 36 years. There was a moment of silence tonight as the fans gathered at Busch Stadium remembered August A. Busch Jr. Arriving for the game, many Redbird fans heard for the first time the news that Gussie was dead.
He's done a lot for St. Louis, a lot for baseball, so about all I can say.
Sad. I mean, he's a legend around St. Louis and actually a legend around the United States.
I think it's tragic. I just can't believe it. And I wish we could have won the pennant for him one more time.
Gussie's love of his baseball Cardinals knew no bounds. It was 1953 when Gussie and the brewery got into Major League Baseball. Busch saved the Redbirds for St. Louis. From the start, Busch admitted he didn't know much about baseball, but it didn't take him long to learn.
We're delighted to be the owners of the Cardinals, and we're going to try to give the fans everywhere the finest baseball that is known in the United States.
Hey, take me out to the ball game.
Later, when developers ran out of money for a new stadium in downtown St. Louis, Busch stepped in and helped raise the additional millions of dollars needed. The company now owns the stadium. The St. Louis Cardinals won 6 pennants and 3 World Series titles under Busch ownership. And it was always a great sight, of course, to see Gussie Busch aboard the Budweiser beer wagon pulled by those magnificent Clydesdales, making the grand tour around Busch Stadium with 50,000 Cardinal fans on their feet cheering and singing the Budweiser song. With more on the people that he touched as a sportsman, let's go live now to the stadium that bears his name, and Channel 5 Sports Director Mike Busch. Mike?
Dick, you know, a lot of the current Cardinal players never really got to know Gussie Busch because of ill health in his last few years. He didn't make it to the ballpark or to the clubhouse as much as he used to. But there are still plenty of people around, both in the press box and on the field, who remember.
One of the best moves Gussie Busch probably ever made as the owner of the Cardinals was in 1980 when he hired Whitey Herzog as manager. The Cardinals had been through some lean years of the 1970s, and Gussie had just about had it.
He wanted a winner. I mean, boy, that's one thing he told me. He wants to win one more time. I can remember that first day before I ever signed a contract. He said, I want to win one more time.
The Cardinals had also gone through some lean years when Gussie Busch took over the ownership in 1953.
And over the years, you know, he is a man who, I guess in order, loved his family, the brewery, animals, and the Cardinals fourth. Over the years, I think a greater feeling
he acquired for the ball company.
The Cardinals won the World Championship in 1964. They did it again in '67, and they won the pennant in 1968. Harry Carey was the voice of the Cardinals then, and even though they had a falling out in 1969 when Carey was fired, he still remembered Gussie as a friend.
People had the wrong idea. People thought I was advising Gussie on baseball. I never discussed baseball. We talked about cars. We talked about girls. We talked about the beer business. I never once talked to him about baseball.
He'll be remembered as a friend to those of these sportsmen who knew him. He'll be remembered as a successful baseball owner who wouldn't settle for second best. But perhaps most of all, Gussie Busch will be remembered among the Cardinal faithful as a fan.
I think that being Gussie Busch and the fact that we were in the race this year, if there's anything that made him live till today, it was the fact that we were in the race. And I just kind of had a feeling, knowing him, that he wasn't going to die till we were eliminated.
Yeah, you know, Bob Bragg said something interesting today. He said he wanted people to remember Gussie not as the man in failing health, but as the robust leader of the Cardinals during the 1950s. I think you can get a taste of that if you go back to this interview in 1955 with Harry Carey and Gussie Busch.
Hello again, everybody. This is Harry Carey with Joe Garagiola from Allang Field here in sunny St. Petersburg, Florida, the training base of the St. Louis Cardinals, where our guest today is the president of Anheuser-Busch and of the St. Louis Cardinals, Mr. August A. Busch, Jr. Mr. Busch, a beautiful camp, beautiful weather, everything. Now all we need is a pennant, huh?
You bet your sweet life, Harry, and we're going to try like the devil to get it this year.
Joe, you notice that Mr. Busch is getting in shape just like the players.
Yeah, I see him playing a little pepper down there.
Mr. Busch, I know that everybody is optimistic looking ahead to the 1955 season. Things went a little bit wrong last year, and yet it wouldn't have taken too many games, a few breaks here and there to make the Cardinals perhaps a pennant winner even a year ago. And looking ahead to 1955 with some of these youngsters, why, there's good reason to be optimistic, don't you think?
I certainly do, Harry, and I'd like to say this. I think I know a little bit more about baseball, and I'm happier this year with our Cardinals than I've been since we've owned them.
Did you have any idea, Mr. Busch, that a ball club would involve such time as it does?
Well, frankly, Harry, it does involve a lot of time, and it is not only the greatest sport in the world, but it's a pretty big business, to be frank with you.
Do you find it difficult to distinguish between being a fan and the owner of the club?
No, I think by gum that every fan has got to be a manager and part owner of the club to be a real honest-to-goodness fan, and I don't think there's such a great deal of difference.
And what a great fan he was. That's how people will remember Gussie Busch. And, of course, the 6 pennants and the 3 world championships weren't bad either. Dick?
Mike, I guess there is something ironic about the timing of his death with the Cubs in town for the big weekend. Harry Carey, an old friend of his, in town. It was almost like a reunion for him.
Yeah, and it seemed like the people that were here tonight, a packed crowd here at Busch Stadium to watch the Cubs and the Cardinals, were not only here to watch the Cubs and the Cardinals, but to honor Gussie Busch. Maybe to at least envision in their minds of watching him take that tour in the beer wagon with the Clydesdales one more time around the ballpark. And why not? The Cardinals won the game tonight 7-5.
Okay, Mike, thank you. Gussie Busch's death, of course, does mark the end of an era in St. Louis history. We close this special tribute to him with a musical salute and some film highlights of his long and illustrious career.
This is Channel 2, KTBI, St. Louis. This is the Channel 2 News Weekend Reports.
Accolades and condolences continue to pour in from across the country for beer baron August Busch Jr. He died yesterday at the age of 90. When word reached the White House, President Bush described him as a legendary figure in American life for almost a century. Flags at Anheuser-Busch and Busch Stadium remain at half-mast, and Grant's Farm is closed. Busch took the brewery and made it into the largest beer producer in America and shared his wealth with the city he loved. His legacy etched in the cornerstones of buildings throughout the city and the hearts of its people.
You've made me into Mr. St. Louis, but not a Mr. St. Louis who's the richest or the most powerful man in St. Louis, but who's giving of himself to help the whole community.
Now, there will be a private funeral Sunday, and the brewery will close at 2 p.m. Tuesday so workers can attend a memorial service at St. Louis Cathedral.
From your 24-hour news source, this is News 4 St. Louis at 6.
The death of former Anheuser-Busch chairman August Busch Jr. has closed an important chapter in the history of the brewing business. Gussie Busch transformed what had been a local business to the worldwide king of beers. News 4's Eric Thomas reports on the legacy of the man some call the last of the beer barons.
The sprawling Anheuser-Busch complex in South St. Louis represents the top of the brewing heap, the true world leader in beer making. But it wasn't always that way.
You know, prior to World War II, almost all beer was sold by local and regional brewers. And I think Mr. Busch Jr. realized that after World War II, the industry was going to become a national industry.
It was in the post-World War II period that August Busch Jr. assumed control of the family-owned business and drove it to the top.
Mr. Busch Jr. was the first brewer to build satellite breweries away from his home city. And I think these are the factors that led to the brewery's survival.
Before the war, the regional nature of the brewing business forced Anheuser-Busch to share the spotlight with other local beer families, such as the Lemps and the Grizzadicks. But Weinberg says Gussie Busch recognized upcoming changes in the business that his competitors did not.
The Lemps and the Grizzadicks probably did not reinvest sufficient funds in their beer enterprise. They took money out of the business. They lived high on the income of the business.
Weinberg says August Busch Jr. left his family a solid foundation on which they could continue as the undisputed industry leader. Eric Thomas, News 4, St. Louis.
And Professor Weinberg says current Anheuser-Busch chief August Busch III combines the best intuitive management skills of his father with the best qualities of the 90s corporate leader.
Channel 5, KSDK, St. Louis. And now, Channel 5 Eyewitness News Weekend Report.
Well, the St. Louis area continues to mourn the passing of its leading citizen, Gussie Busch. Flags are flying at half-staff at the Anheuser-Busch Brewery, the home of the beer company that Busch built into a dynasty. Gussie Busch died yesterday at his estate at Grant's Farm. Tours there have been canceled this weekend. President Bush expressed his regret, calling Gussie Busch a legendary figure. Funeral services will be private, but a memorial mass will be held Tuesday at the St. Louis Cathedral.
Channel 5, KSDK, St. Louis. And now, Channel 5 Eyewitness News Weekend Report.
President Bush has extended his condolences to the family of August A. Busch Jr. In a statement, the president described Busch as a legend in the realm of business, charity, and sports. Flags are flying at half-staff at the Anheuser-Busch Brewery, the home of the company Busch transformed from a small ailing company into a dynasty. Busch died yesterday at his Grant's Farm home. He was 90. Joining President Bush in expressing sympathy were Bush's competitors at the Coors and Miller breweries. A memorial mass will be held Tuesday at the St. Louis Cathedral.
From your 24-hour news source, this is News 4 St. Louis Nightside.
Good evening. Thanks for tuning in to this slightly late edition of Nightside. My partner, Russ Mitchell, has the night off. The man known as Mr. St. Louis, August A. Busch Jr., was laid to rest today, 2 days after his death at age 90. The morning service was private, held at the Busch family home at Grant's Farm. But as the funeral procession moved slowly along Gravois en route to the Sunset Burial Park, St. Louisans continued to pay their respects, lining the streets. And later, at Busch Stadium, before the final game this season of Gussie's beloved Cardinals, broadcaster Jack Buck remembered the team's biggest fan as a lone Clydesdale was led across the field.
August A. Busch Jr., Gussie Busch. A great sportsman, civic leader, successful business executive, and humanitarian. Mr. Busch helped make St. Louis a wonderful place to live, great place to visit, to do business, raise a family, and he certainly left an imprint on our city and our baseball team, which will never be forgotten.
A memorial mass open to the public will be held Tuesday at the new cathedral on Lindell at 4 p.m.
A 21-gun salute today as August A. Busch Jr. is laid to rest near Grant's Farm. Good evening, everyone. I'm Rick Edlund. This is the late edition of the Weekend Report. Mr. Busch died Friday afternoon at the age of 90. Today, in a small service, he was buried in the family plot just up the road from Grant's Farm. Well-wishers paid their last respects along Gravois as the funeral procession made its way from Grant's Farm into the Sunset Burial Grounds. The service was private, attended only by close friends and relatives, but many, many more were there in spirit. A driver guided a coach and four into view, minus the man who used to proudly shepherd it around the family estate he so loved. The man everyone knew as Gussie was once proclaimed St. Louis's #1 ambassador to the world. The owner of the baseball Cardinals, he was also a tireless civic leader and philanthropist. The name will live on, of course, in the brewery that Gussie Busch turned into a dynasty. And so will a legend of a man who often seemed larger than life. A memorial mass will be held Tuesday at the St. Louis Cathedral at 4 o'clock.
This is St. Louis's only primetime newscast with Bill Reese, Susan Cho with the weather, and Bob Ramsey with sports. This is St. Louis 11 News at 9.
Well, here in St. Louis, August A. Busch Jr. was laid to rest today at Sunset Memorial Park. The funeral services at the Busch family estate, Grant's Farm, were private, with only family members and close friends attending. At Busch Stadium, the Cardinals played their last game of the season shortly after the funeral. Before the game, one of Gussie Busch's beloved Clydesdales was led onto the field. Mr. Busch loved to drive his team, pulling a wagon load of Budweiser onto the field before Cardinal games. Cardinals announcer Jack Buck addressed the packed stadium.
Which will never be forgotten. In addition to his family and to his company, two of the things Gussie loved the most were the Budweiser Clydesdales and the Cardinals. It's somehow fitting that in this, his final season, and Mr. Busch was laid to rest just about an hour ago, the Cardinals once again drew more than 3 million people at this park. If he were with us today, and in spirit I'm certain he is, we would like to thank the Cardinal players for all the excitement they have given us, and to you Cardinal fans who we happen to think here in St. Louis are the best in the baseball world.
Everyone in the packed stadium stood and joined in a moment of silence to pay tribute to the man who had such a tremendous influence on St. Louis, the Cardinals, and on baseball, August A. Busch Jr. A memorial mass will be read at 4 o'clock Tuesday afternoon at St. Louis Cathedral. Employees at the Anheuser-Busch Brewery will be permitted time off to attend. The public is invited to attend the memorial mass, but the family has requested that in lieu of flowers, donations be made to the August A. Busch Jr. Memorial Charitable Foundation. The address is Post Office Box 1826, St. Louis, Missouri, the zip code 63118. The newly established foundation will provide support to a variety of charities. August A. Busch Jr. died Friday. He was 90.
From your 24-hour news source, This is News for St. Louis at 6.
St. Louisans will mourn the death of August Busch Jr. at a memorial mass tomorrow. The mass will be celebrated at 4 p.m. at the St. Louis Cathedral on Lindell. Busch was laid to rest at Sunset Memorial Park in South County yesterday after private services for the Busch family at the estates at Grant's Farm. Hundreds watched along Gravois Road as the procession made its way to the cemetery. In the meantime, a symbolic gesture at Busch Stadium was anything but private. A riderless Clydesdale paraded around the stadium grounds yesterday as nearly 38,000 fans observed a moment of silence.
This is St. Louis's only primetime newscast with Don Clark, Bill Reese, Christine Buck with the weather, and Rich Gould with sports. This is St. Louis 11 News at 9.
A solemn memorial mass will be set tomorrow for August A. Busch Jr., who passed away last Friday. Busch was 90 years old. He had been ill for some time. That mass will take place at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon at the St. Louis Cathedral. Employees of the brewery will be permitted time off to attend. The public is also invited to attend the mass, but the Busch family has asked that in lieu of flowers, donations be made to the August A. Busch Jr. Memorial Charitable Foundation. Now, if you want to make a contribution, the address is Post Office Box 1826, St. Louis, Missouri. The zip code is 63118. The newly established charity will support a variety of organizations.
This is Channel 2, KTBI, St. Louis. This is Channel 2 News at 5.
Thousands of friends got to say goodbye to Gussie Busch this afternoon.
A funeral mass is being celebrated now at the St. Louis Cathedral. Paul Shankman is live there right now. Paul?
Well, Don and Catherine, it's quite a ceremony here at the St. Louis Cathedral. About 1,500 people inside for a memorial mass for the man they call Mr. St. Louis, Gussie Busch. You're looking at a live picture right now from inside. Lots of folks here, the rich and the famous, captains of industry, politicians, other baseball team owners, plus common and ordinary folks, admirers, and employees of Anheuser-Busch themselves who came in this afternoon by busload. They were given the day off. Earlier this afternoon, Father Paul Reinert spoke. He is a spiritual advisor to the family. He also administered last rites to Mr. Busch on Friday. Here is a little bit of what he had to say.
Gussie's life was like a precious diamond that had many sides to it, other facets that were just as sparkling as his business and civic career. Running parallel all through his years in the business world and in public life was Gussie the man, the person, a lovable, loving human being.
I loved him because he was such a full man. He lived a full life. He did everything and did it well. And very enthusiastic, up kind of individual. He gave you great confidence and instilled great drive in you, and I love that.
Ed McMahon, of course, has been a spokesman for the brewery for years, one of many celebrities here. We'll have some interviews with more of them as they come out for you tonight at 10 o'clock on Channel 2 News. For now, Paul Shankman, Channel 2 News, live at the St. Louis Cathedral. Don and Catherine?
Well, Paul, Gussie Busch will always be remembered for presiding over a $14 billion empire, but he'll also be remembered as a man who saved a lot of what is best in St. Louis.
For a long, long time to come.
This is Channel 2, KTBI, St. Louis. This is Channel 2 News at 10.
St. Louis has now said its final goodbye to Mr. St. Louis. August Busch Jr., Gussie Busch, was remembered today at a memorial mass by those who worked for him, by those who worked with him, and by those who never knew him at all. Channel 2's Paul Shankman reports.
You didn't have to ask for whom these bells tolled. The crush of brewery employees and civic leaders, the riderless horse and the military guard made it quite clear that this was a farewell to Gussie Busch. 2 days after his family buried him, a community buried him in spirit.
This Mass is a memorial for the people who meant so much to my father throughout his entire life. God bless him and each and every one of you.
Many of the 1,500 faces in the crowd were familiar ones, captains of industry, politicians, and celebrities.
Well, he was a pillar of baseball and one of the great owners of baseball, and maybe we need more common sense in baseball like Gussie used to have.
I loved him because he was such a full man. He lived a full life. He did everything and did it well. and very enthusiastic, up kind of individual. He gave you great confidence and instilled great drive in you, and I love that.
But mixed in with the well-known and well-heeled were little people, too. People who never met Gussie Busch, but felt like they knew him and felt like they should say goodbye.
I just felt that I had to come so I could tell my children and the grandchildren when I get home and tell them, because we have always admired Mr. Busch and his whole family.
And so the formal tributes to Gussie Busch are now over, but the memories of him are everywhere, in the institutions and the people he touched, in every corner of this city. Paul Shankman, Channel 2 News.
From your 24-hour news source, this is News for St. Louis at 6.
Thousands of St. Louisans joined to mourn the death of a man they knew as Gussie Busch.
The bells ringing at St. Louis Cathedral, scene of a funeral mass honoring August Anheuser-Busch Jr., a man honored as the #1 St. Louis citizen.
Good evening. Gussie Busch was buried Sunday in a private service with family members present.
Today, the citizens pay their respects. News 4's Lori Waters is at the cathedral joining us live. Lori.
Larry and Robin, before it began, the memorial mass for Gussie Busch was described more as a celebration of his life, more so than a mourning of his passing. And indeed, that proved to be the case. Longtime family friend, Father Paul Reiner, spoke of Gussie Busch's early days as a philanthropist and of the joy that brought him. He reminisced about his early days as president of St. Louis University, when the two men would just sit and talk. And members of the Busch family could not speak of Gussie without speaking of his love for St. Louis.
My father's life, very simply, was his family, his business, and his community. His approach to life embodied all the virtues we hold dear: pride, admiration, respect, and devotion.
This Mass is a memorial for the people who meant so much to my father throughout his entire life. God bless him and each and every one of you.
Archbishop John May spoke of Gussie Busch's devotion to the city and of the Archbishop's certainty that that devotion will live on even though Gussie Busch is no longer with us. Today, Gussie Busch was remembered as a great man, but also a complex man, a man who gave opportunities to those who accepted the challenge. And perhaps indicative of the way that he lived, at the end of the service, the processional ended. The processional exited the church to the strains of God Bless America. And I think that possibly indicated Gussie Busch's love for his church, for his city, and for his country. Lori Waters reporting live at the St. Louis Cathedral. Robin and Larry.
Lori, this had originally been arranged as an opportunity for brewery workers to be there. Did they have that opportunity?
Yes, they did. A large section of the church was partitioned off so they could come. Shuttle buses brought them from the brewery so they could partake in this service, and many of them did come.
All right, thank you, Laura. Now, mourners from far and near came to pay their last respects to Mr. Busch.
Among those saying farewell are some who knew him as a leading corporate figure, and others who sat across the baseball table from him as another team owner.
The guy was very full of life, and he instilled that in others, and I loved him for that.
Celebrities and prominent citizens from across the country came to bid a formal farewell to August A. Busch Jr. Many of them knew him as a personal friend. There were civic leaders who knew Mr. Busch for his philanthropy. Others hoping to follow in Mr. Busch's footsteps in the athletic world as a team owner. There were Mr. Busch's family members and heirs, executives from the Anheuser-Busch Brewery, executives from the baseball Cardinals team, and other team owners from across the nation.
We need all the old ball club owners back. I mean, he made a lot of sense, and to me, he added very much to the game, and he had a lot of integrity, and he certainly loves this town of St. Louis, and I can see why he is Mr. St. Louis.
Well, I think Mr. Busch was what baseball is all about. He is contributed to so many things to the game. I personally have a memory of him, because coming along as a young person, I had the opportunity to serve with him on a couple of boards, and it was very, very encouraging to me to come along in his footsteps.
What do you think he will be remembered for as having contributed to the game?
Well, I think the betterment of it, the great stadium you have here, the fact you draw 3 million people every year, baseball is just part of the St. Louis atmosphere, and that's what makes it such a great city, and I think that is a proper legacy for him.
Most of the other Major League team owners we talked with agreed that Mr. Busch brought his own personal brand of honesty to the table, a different perspective, one which they learned from, one which they will miss deeply.
As we told you at the beginning of this newscast, this was the day for the Mass for August Busch Jr.
Well, let's go back and check in with Laurie Waters, who is outside of the St. Louis Cathedral. Laurie?
The Memorial Mass for Gussie Busch has just ended, and the thousands who were in attendance here have come and gone safely. St. Louis police report no major problems here at all. Now, those attending the service included the top political and business leaders of St. Louis, and there were also many people from the world of baseball. Numerous baseball team owners came to pay their respects to the man who so loved his St. Louis Cardinals. It was an upbeat service, a fitting tribute to the man known as Mr. St. Louis. Laurie Waters reporting live outside the St. Louis Cathedral.
That's right. And as we point out, it's more of a celebration of life than in mourning.
A very rich life of St. Louis's first citizen.
From your 24-hour news source, this is News 4 St. Louis Nightside.
The city of St. Louis remembers August Busch Jr. with a memorial mass at St. Louis Cathedral. News 4's Laurie Waters reports on the celebration of a life lived to the fullest.
Thousands jammed the new cathedral on Lindell for a service which drew friends and fans of Gussie Busch from all across the country.
To me, he was just a great American, a great man, and a great family.
He was a guy who was very full of life, and he instilled that in others, and I loved him for that.
Inside, longtime friend Father Paul Reinert remembered Gussie Busch as a great and complex man. Family members spoke of the unbreakable bond between their father and St. Louis.
Our father loved St. Louis. He loved the people who live here. Even more, he knew that his affection was fully returned by the men and women of this great community.
Every time we see a coach and four in hand, or the Clydesdale 8-horse hitch, we will remember how he loved the thrill of watching the Cardinals come from behind to win.
My father's life, very simply, was his family, his business, and his community.
The memorial mass ended not with a religious hymn, but with a tribute to the country so loved by August Busch. The service originally was designed to be an opportunity for employees of the Anheuser-Busch Brewery to pay their respects to the man they affectionately call Gussie. But family members decided to open the service to the public, and so many attended that they had to set up speakers outside for the overflow crowd. Larry and Julius.
All right, thank you, Laurie.
Channel 5, KSDK, St. Louis. And now, Channel 5 Eyewitness News at 6.
And here at home, a memorial service for Gussie Busch attracted hundreds to the St. Louis Cathedral. Brewery workers, friends, and members of the Busch family joined in the ceremonies. Channel 5's Julie Carey joins us now with a live report from the cathedral. Julie?
Karen, more than 1,000 people left the cathedral just about 45 minutes ago at a conclusion of a memorial mass which paid tribute to the life of August A. Busch Jr. The 90-year-old captain of a brewery and the St. Louis Cardinals was buried Friday in a private service. This mass today was for the public. Among those remembering Gussie Busch were politicians like Governor John Ashcroft. Entertainer Ed McMahon was here, civic leaders, and of course many employees of Anheuser-Busch. The mood, though, was not entirely one of sorrow. This mass was meant to be a celebration of a man whose brewery and baseball team symbolized St. Louis. But when Busch's family reflected on his life, they spoke of his link not to the rich and powerful, but to everyday St. Louisans.
My father's life, very simply, was his family, his business, and his community. His approach to life embodied all the virtues we hold dear: pride, admiration, respect, and devotion. Pride in our city, admiration and respect for ourselves, our leaders, and our country, and devotion to the things we believe in. By embracing these virtues, my father had everything in common with the people of St. Louis.
Son Adolphus Busch IV also called his father an inspired leader, and he thanked the people of St. Louis for being the source of that inspiration. Reporting live from the cathedral in the Central West End, Julie Carey, Channel 5 Eyewitness News.
Thanks, Julie. Good evening. This is the late edition of Eyewitness News Update. I'm Karen Foss.
And I'm Dick Ford. More than 1,000 people joined the family of Gussie Busch in a public tribute today as the people of St. Louis bid farewell to the St. Louis leader. Channel 5's Julie Carey reports the focus was not on Gussie Busch's life as a powerful executive, but his relationship with everyday St. Louisans.
Hundreds came to the St. Louis Cathedral more than an hour before the 4 o'clock Mass to pay their respects to Gussie Busch. The 90-year-old patriarch was buried Sunday during a private service. This was a chance for the public to say goodbye. Everyone from entertainer Ed McMahon to the many employees at Anheuser-Busch.
This afternoon, our sorrow is turned into joy.
From the start, the service became a celebration of a man whose brewery and baseball team became virtual symbols of the city. But the clergy in Busch's family chose to focus on his lesser-known achievements, such as fundraising for St. Louis University.
We thank Gussie Busch for his life of self-giving.
One of Busch's daughters and two of his sons gave eulogies. Adolphus Busch IV called his father's death a deep loss.
My father's life, very simply, was his family, his business, and his community. By embracing these virtues, my father had everything in common with the people of St. Louis.
And son August Busch III promised the relationship between his family and St. Louis will not change.
His values will live on in his company and through every member of his family. We will do our best to contribute to the life and the vitality of this community.
Finally, his family said Gussie Busch was an inspired leader, but they say the source of his inspiration was the people of St. Louis.
Gussie Busch is buried in the family plot at Sunset Memorial Park.
Good evening and welcome to the late edition of Eyewitness News Update. I'm Karen Foss.
And I'm Dick Ford. The last will and testament of August A. Busch Jr. is filed in St. Louis County Probate Court.
It's the blueprint for who will own and control the Busch family dynasty now that Gussie is gone. Nightbeat reporter Huel Perkins has more on the story for us. Huel?
Karen, Dick, this 78-page will was signed by Gussie Busch in July of 1987. There are few surprises here. Busch has provided something for all of his living sons and daughters. In the document, Gussie expresses a deep attachment to what he calls the family property, particularly Grant's farm, his home, and the home of his father before him. Busch directed most of that land and stock to be held in trust for the family, to be divided among his surviving children. The will makes no specific reference to Gussie's beloved baseball team, the Cardinals, but gives his heirs and trustees wide discretion in how to best manage the Busch billion-dollar fortune, which means the assets could be sold. Probate attorneys say the actual distribution of any estate takes a minimum of 6 months, longer in some cases.
I don't think he would have that much of a problem with the children because from the reputation of Mr. Busch, I believe most of his children are fairly well taken care of anyway, and probably had certain amounts of assets provided for them at certain ages in their life. The big problem would probably be from the unknown things that may come up with someone outside of the family giving some type of claim.
The will also leaves various amounts of less than $50,000 each to August Busch's favorite friends and employees, many of whom worked with him as he built a once small family brewery into the world's largest beer maker. Now, Gussie's son, Adolphus Busch IV, is named as a trustee. There are also cash bequests of $250,000 each to two of Gussie's daughters. but about 125 acres of land near Grant's farm are given to his sons. As charitable as he was in life, Gussie Busch made no mention of any charities in his will. And experts tell us that attorney's fees for execution of this will could run more than $1 million.
You know, we've had a few calls from people who think that somehow this is an invasion of Mr. Bush's privacy to be telling people what's in his will.
Well, that's understandable. Once a will is filed in probate court, it becomes public record. Anybody can read it. Anybody can receive it. Anybody can read this at any time. And that is done for the protection of all parties involved.
Okay,
thank you. One great tradition every year at Harrisburg is the appearance of the famous Budweiser Clydesdales.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, here they come, the world-famous Budweiser Clydesdales. Here they come now to the arena tonight, the world-famous Budweiser Hitch, as they join us. And again, the Thunder Hoos announcing the arrival of the living symbol of Anheuser-Busch, the world's largest brewer. The tradition lives on here tonight as the charisma of the Clydesdale breed joins us. And how about a big welcome for the 8 tons of champions.
The appearance of the Clydesdale Hitch this year is a somewhat sad reminder of the passing of August A. Busch, Jr. Mr. Busch loved this living symbol of his company. His contributions to equestrian competition around the world are well known, and his love of animals and wildlife will live on in the preserves and amusement parks that carry his name. No one who ever saw the Clydesdale Hitch with Mr. Busch aboard will ever forget the thrill of these beautiful horses with that great and important man at the reins as they entered Busch Stadium in St. Louis. We will greatly miss Mr. Busch, even as we remember his importance to the world of horses. I will miss him even more. He was my grandfather.
We've just taken the most ambitious step in our history, but that doesn't break tradition. To be the owners of the Cardinals, and we're going to try to give the fans everywhere the finest baseball that is known in the United States.
Good evening. We are near the end of an eventful day here in St. Louis, a day that marks the end of a life which has touched nearly all of us who live in the St. Louis area.
August Anheuser-Busch Jr., known to all as Gussie Busch, is dead at the age of 90. He's a man who was a great revitalizer, bringing his father's brewery back to a #1 position and adding new luster to a Cardinals baseball team that had grown faded when he took it over. He was known for his love of people, fondness for animals, and his undying affection for the city he called home. Paul Schenkman looks at the life and death of Gussie Busch.
You need a lot of words to describe Gussie Busch. He was a liver. He lived life. He was really into it. He was an outstanding businessman. He was a fellow with a lot of emotion, a lot of feeling. And when he set his mind to do something, why, he got it done.
Jack Buck knew Gussie Busch pretty well, but then didn't we all? By watching the games his team played in his stadium, by drinking his products, by living in his town. In a very real sense, we all knew him because we enjoyed the very things he always said he cared about most. August Anheuser-Busch Jr. was born March 28, 1899, the grandson of Adolphus Busch, who began brewing beer in St. Louis in 1876. In 1922, after trying his hand on the railroad and in banking, Gussie decided to enter the family business, at first sweeping floors and cleaning vats. And even though he would someday be president of the company, he never forgot what it was like to be at the bottom.
Mr. Busch made frequent trips to the plants. I think there are 10 now, but there were then 6 or 7, I forget. And always the red carpet. I mean, literally and figuratively rolled out for him. But you know what he'd do? He'd never go in the front door. He'd go in the side door because he'd visit the toilets. You know why? Because he used to say, if there aren't enough towels and soap and a clean toilet, then the whole plant has to be damn near condemned.
But while clean facilities may have been a pet peeve, the challenges he would have to face as an industrialist were far bigger. The first was prohibition. Determined to keep the company going, the brewery made yeast and soft drinks and refrigeration cabinets. But even after prohibition, there were rocky times ahead. In 1947, 1 year after Gussie became brewery president, the company fell from first to fourth among American brewers. Gussie Busch got busy ordering a $50 million expansion, opening new breweries on both coasts, and it worked.
That at 10:34 a.m. on December the 15th, Anheuser-Busch rolled out our 10 millionth barrel of beer brewed this year.
But saving the brewery wasn't his only coup. Many believe his decision to buy the Cardinals and build the stadium is what brought back downtown St. Louis.
It was a terrible place, and the building of the stadium, which is directly attributable to Gussie Busch, saved the city of St. Louis and kept it one of the best cities in the country, to my mind.
But that's only where the Busch legacy begins. It was Gussie Busch who got the ball rolling when the St. Louis Symphony was in trouble, and when the Metropolitan Sewer District needed to pass a major bond issue. No matter where you go in St. Louis, reminders of his power and generosity are everywhere.
So the world has changed, and maybe wouldn't be any place today for the likes of a Mr. Busch of yesterday. But he certainly filled a role. Every mayor in the city of St. Louis had no compunction about calling him up and saying, Gussie, I'd like to come out and see you, and say, Gussie, we're going to have a bond issue, and Gussie, we need help, and will you help us raise the money, and do whatever he did so well. You know. Now, the usual stuff is, you know, he was a great man and he will be missed. In this instance, he will be missed.
Although frail in his last years, a giant is now gone from the landscape. Gussie Busch cut a path through life and has left a void with his death. Someone once said, he is great who is what he is from nature and who never reminds us of others. They didn't break the mold after they made Gussie Busch. They broke it before they started. He may have been a billionaire, but he'll be remembered as one in a million.
Gussie Busch was certainly a quotable fellow, but among the many things he said, the thing he said most often was that being second isn't worth anything.
Thousands of people in the St. Louis area knew Gussie Busch, or at least felt that they did.
Among the ones who observed his life most are those who watched the game of baseball. Don Johnson is live at Busch Stadium with more on that. Don?
Well, Catherine and Don, I'm here in the press box. The game just ended just a few moments ago. The Cardinals won the game 7-5. I'm sure that would please Gussie. You'd have to call this the house that Busch built. After all, it was his $5 million that got the ball rolling to get it going. This is the press box up here where I am, and although Mr. Busch was not seen up here frequently, certainly his generosity was felt. Baseball writers love to come here. They love to work this particular press box because there was always plenty of food and plenty of his Busch products around. And they could have as much of it as they wanted until about the fourth inning. In any event, veteran writers like Bob Ray of the Post-Dispatch remember him, as does former Cardinal player and current baseball announcer Mike Shannon.
I'd like to put him in a time warp of when I first knew him, when they bought the ball club in '53. Oh, he's about his mid-50s, round-faced, rugged, strong as a bull, you know, so aggressive and so competitive in everything he did. The guy was a winner. He didn't tolerate losing too much, and he was a very pleasant man to be with. He had his weaknesses, but we all do.
This guy had so much vitality, and he loved life so much. I mean, he really loved it. He enjoyed it, and I think he generated a lot of love. You talk about Mr. Busch to the average guy on the street, to the businessman he dealt with, to the associates in his business. They loved him. You heard that word a lot with Gussie. He loved horses. He loved animals. He loved his kids. He loved the brewing industry. He loved St. Louis. He loved baseball. He loved winning. Every time you think about him, you think of love.
Quickly, Mike, it just won't be the same, will it?
No. You can never replace people like Gussie Busch. When they made Gussie, they threw the mold away.
And one of those things that Mike didn't say was that Gussie Busch liked Mike Shannon an awful lot. I think loved him is a good word. Joining me now is Kevin Horgan. He is with the new St. Louis Sun. Kevin also, for a long time, wrote sports and baseball for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and now he's kind of covering the city in general as a columnist for the Sun. So he understands, I think, Mr. Busch's importance as both a sportsman and as a man who was a civic-minded. Tell us, Kevin, what does this all mean to us now that we don't have a man like Mr. Busch around?
Well, you know, the old cliche you reach for is it's an end of an era, but actually the era ended a long time ago. Gus Busch had been retired out of the public eye since the mid-'70s when he gave up the chairmanship at Anheuser-Busch. I think the sad thing, and ironic in a way, is that a lot of people in St. Louis now, the only thing they remember Gussie Busch for is the rides around the stadium. And people forget what an awesome impact he had on this city. Not just the baseball team, but certainly this is an important part of it. But with all of downtown St. Louis where we're standing right now, this would be a very, very different place if it weren't for Gussie Busch.
It's almost Bushville, isn't it? I think the thing we ought to point out is that perhaps that August Busch's overall influence on this city, he could knock on doors and make people answer doors and make people toe the mark but he wasn't a mean fellow. He was just a tough guy, wasn't he?
Yeah, and he was a hands-on guy. He was a different breed of manager than we have today. Maybe a Gussie Busch couldn't come along now and run a company today the way he did then. He ran it from top to bottom. He knew everybody that worked for that brewery almost there for a while. And if there was a decision to be made, he didn't need a committee to make it. He made it himself.
Yeah. If there are some talk that perhaps there may be some changes not only in the ball club but in the structure of the brewery, did you ever hear those rumblings, Kevin? And do you think that's a possibility now that the old man is gone?
No, the ball club has been preparing for this for quite some time. And about 6 years ago, Fred Kuhlman took over day-to-day operations of the Cardinals. And just 2 weeks ago, Mark Sauer, who had been running the stadium operation for Anheuser-Busch, was put in charge. He was like deputy operating officer of the baseball team now, too. So the transition has been made, and Gussie Busch has been out of the brewery since 1975 when he was replaced by his son.
Okay, Kevin, I want to thank you so much for taking time to talk to us.
Okay, Don, good luck.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. That was Kevin Horgan, columnist for the new St. Louis Sun newspaper, and I might add this personal note that being a St. Louisan all of my entire life, the only name I've ever heard associated with this baseball team is August A. Busch Jr., and it's going to seem strange, frankly, to not hear that name associated, at least in a living way. Back to you, Don and Kathy.
All right, Don. Up next, Budweiser Stadium.
It almost was. We'll hear from a longtime friend of Gussie Busch when we come back.
St. Louis, I think that no one person, his impact and his mark is left here in many different ways.
The life of August Busch Jr. is scattered with enough stories to fill a book, a big book. Al Fleischman should know. As Gussie's publicist, he helped write a Busch biography. But it was never completed, so you just can't look up all those stories. You have to look up Al Fleischman.
He once named the ballpark Budweiser Stadium. We couldn't talk him out of it. It lasted overnight. Next day, it was at Grant's farm. Said, Mr. Busch, this is not the name for a ballpark. Of course, for him, Budweiser was everything. I said, Mr. Busch, what would you think of Phil Wrigley if he, by the way, Wrigley owned the ball club personally, Mr. Busch did not own. What would you think of Mr. Wrigley if he called it Juicy Fruit Stadium? What would you think of General Mills, I think it was, if they called it Grape Nut Stadium? He caught it right away. He said, get Ford Frick, who was the commissioner, get him on the phone and tell him we're changing the name. And they did.
Gussie could do a lot with a phone call. Change the name of a stadium, get a president to come to town, and as Al Fleischman remembers, he could even get you a plane reservation.
When he was asked to be the chairman of the 200th anniversary for St. Louis, he said, okay. The next thing he did was picked up the phone and called the White House and said, Lyndon, I want you to come down here. He was his close friend. I want you to come down here and be our guest speaker opening the 200th anniversary. And Lyndon Johnson said, okay, Gussie, and that was it. He wanted I don't know how you explain this, except that he was special. He wanted a ticket for one of his directors to come here to vote on whether or not Anheuser-Busch buys the Cardinals, and his director said, I can't get a ticket out of here from Palm Beach. He just turned to me. I happened to be the pun. He said, get Eddie Rickenbacker on the phone. Eddie Rickenbacker was the president of the famous flyer, president of Eastern Airlines. Hello, Eddie, yeah.
I need a ticket for one of my directors from Palm Beach on Eastern Airlines tomorrow. You got it, Gussie. That was it.
He had clout in town and out of town, obviously. Well, as powerful as he was, Gussie Busch was not one to capitalize on an embarrassing mistake. In fact, Fleischman tells us he could become unexpectedly generous when the situation called for it.
We opened up a new brewery in Los Angeles at Van Nuys. 1,200 people in a tent. It was tremendous. And everybody, there was a glass of Budweiser in front of, a fluted glass in front of everybody, and a bottle of Budweiser, all the Budweiser they could drink. And I noticed the lieutenant governor of the state was putting one under his coat. I said, hey, Mr. Bush, you see the lieutenant governor stealing one of the glasses. He got up on a chair and hollered, because he had a voice, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll all take the Budweiser glasses with you. And 1,200 Budweiser glasses disappeared. They took them home. I don't know what was said that night in 1,200 different homes. I can't... Now, does you know anybody like that? Does anybody know anybody? I don't know anybody like that.
That's a gracious host.
That certainly is.
Well, Father Paul Reinert of St. Louis University knew someone like that, but it took work to make him that way. Reinert is a close friend of the Busch family. He administered last rites to Gussie Busch today. He says it took a while for Busch to realize how rewarding it could be to share his wealth with the community.
It didn't happen in 5 minutes. I mean, honestly, what I think really sold him was the gradual realization that there's a lot of joy that can come to a person from not just accumulating wealth for one's own family or success in a company, but to be able to share that with other people, especially those who have not had the same opportunities that you've had. And I know that later on, I don't think, as I say, this was totally clear in the beginning, but he grew into that, and that's why he enjoyed it so much, and really thanked us for having asked him to do it, because he said, you've made me into Mr. St. Louis, but not a Mr. St. Louis who's the richest or the most powerful man in St. Louis, but who's giving of himself to help the whole community.
Reinert says he will conduct a private ceremony for the Busch family on Sunday. There will be a public memorial service Tuesday afternoon at 4 at the new cathedral.
And it will be jammed.
Oh.
Up next, Gussie's team.
How he turned the birds around when we come back.
You know, the big thing when he came up with the thing, making friends is our business, that's Gussie Busch.
You know, the impact that Gussie Busch had on the Cardinals can hardly be measured.
But it can be remembered. Bill Davis joins us to do just that.
Well, to be sure, the Cardinals had established a rich baseball tradition in St. Louis long before Gussie Busch bought the team back in 1953. You need only look back to the 1926 Cardinals and the Gas House gang of the 30s to find world champions. But Busch bought the team during a down time, a time when it might have moved to another city.
Gussie Busch claimed he didn't know much about baseball when he bought the Cardinals from Fred Sy in 1953, but he was a fast learner, and he built the Cardinals into the premier organization in baseball today. In the 36 years in which the Busch family has owned the team, the Cardinals have won 6 National League titles and brought the World Championship to St. Louis in 1964, 67, and 82. The franchise has hit its peak in the 1980s as Busch and Whitey Herzog combined to bring 3 league titles and a world championship here. But perhaps the most amazing figure concerning the Cardinals is this. Since 1980, nearly 20 million people have passed through the Busch Stadium turnstiles to watch Cardinal baseball. And that does not include the record 3 million in attendance during the '89 season. 1982 was the high point in the Busch-Herzog alliance as the Cardinals beat the Milwaukee Brewers in the World Series. You could say that Whitey was under orders to win that series.
He wanted to win it. I mean, boy, that's one thing he told me. He wants to win one more time. I can remember that first day before I ever signed a contract. He said, I want to win one more time. He said, I'm getting old. And you know, we were in last place and took the club over, and he let me make the moves I wanted to make and make the trades I wanted to make and give me all the, well, I could do anything I wanted to as long as I called him and told him before he read the paper.
One of the things which stands out in the Busch baseball and beer conglomerate is that Gussie always did things with class. In the years before the multi-million-dollar contracts and players' strikes, Busch was most generous to his employees.
They used to have picnics out at Grant's Farm, and all the players would bring their kids. There'd be a gift for each kid, big gifts and expensive gifts, and then a drawing for a pony and a cart. And he enjoyed the kids. He enjoyed watching the youngsters be made happy. He used to make the down payments for the ball players for their houses or give them interest-free loans. Anything that they wanted. They were his boys. They were his Cardinals.
Gussie Busch was a giant among St. Louisans. With his wealth, of course, came power. And those who knew him closely all say that his power was wielded with a great deal of compassion.
Well, Bill, it's been a very emotional night for Cardinals fans because no matter who won the ball game at Busch Stadium, St. Louis has lost a truly great friend.
Right now, Rocky Madden is standing by live at Mike Shannon's restaurant downtown to talk with some of the people who have warm memories of Gussie Busch. Rocky?
Well, Don, we are talking with the man himself, Mike Shannon. You just came over from the ballpark. There was a win tonight. You knew Mr. Busch on a very personal level. He gave you 2 jobs, one in baseball and one in broadcasting. Special memories?
Yeah, I can remember having a meeting with him one time down at the brewery, and I said to him, Gussie, I said, you know, and I was a young man at the time, I said, you know, I've worked for you better than half my life, and I was only 30-something years old. He was a great guy to work for because he had so much pride, Rocky. He loved what he did. He loved owning the baseball team. He loved making beer. He loved meeting people. And, you know, many times he had phrases like, making friends is our business, and he had a lot of friends. And he enjoyed his work, he enjoyed his play. He was just a heck of a guy.
But what was he like when we don't see him on stage, when he came in on the you know, all the beer and all that? What was he like behind the
He'd be just like one of your friends. I mean, he played cards with the guys, he drank Budweiser with the guys. You wanted to go horseback riding, he'd go with you. You wanted to go for a boat ride, whatever. You'd be surprised. If you played any game with him, though, you better play to win, because he'd knock you down if he got a chance.
What's your favorite memory?
Well, I guess in the 1964 World Series, it was his first World Series. He wanted it so bad. I had a home run off Whitey Ford, and it broke the U in the Budweiser sign at the old ballpark. When we went to New York and came back, the guy by the name of John Kern called me over to Gussie's box, and he said, I've got a bill here for that sign. It's $4,700 and such and such. Well, I was just a rookie, and I was going to get $5,000.
That's a lot of money, then.
Yeah, and he said, here's the bill for that sign. And then he showed it to Gussie, and Gussie said, that's all right. He said, you can tear that old damn sign down if you hit home runs.
Mike Shannon, thank you very much for sharing your memory.
Yeah, we're going to miss him, I'll tell you that.
Thank you. Don, Catherine?
You know, there really isn't anybody else like him in terms of someone who built a baseball team, built a brewery, and really built a city.
Yeah, and that's right. You know, Mike Shannon has to know that as much or more than anybody because he had that terrible kidney problem. He was a ball player, and his career was ended, but Gussie Busch picked him up, put him up in the broadcast booth, and kept his career going because Shannon was a Gussie Busch kind of guy.
And you can tell he's never forgotten that.
Absolutely not. No way.
When we come back, we'll look back.
More memories and images of Gussie Busch next.
He's just, well, he's an historical character, you know. A lot of people come and go through life and they leave no mark at all. And he left marks on everything that he ever touched.
There is reason to mourn tonight. The loss of a prominent, much-loved, giving person is just that, a loss. But it's also easy to smile. We can remember the crusty man with the gravel in his voice. We remember his almost childlike delight when the Cardinals won a pennant. We recall his dashing demeanor as he clung to the beer wagon while his beloved Clydesdales cruised Busch Stadium. We remember that he died today at the very respectable and the ripe old age of 90. He left behind a large, loving family. He lived long and well. His life was full and fulfilling. That it ended today can change none of that.
What a tribute. And as we say goodnight, we leave you with some of the images of Gussie Busch, the way we remember him. Good night.